We were very happy to have Lynn in Cape Town, and Andrea Kano and I have been friends for many years, and that brought us together when Lynn traveled to Cape Town, that we could connect, and we were very happy to show her around Cape Town a bit.
I think the sanctuary can hear you, Lionel, and I think you can begin your formal presentation.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Thank you. So what I'm going to do is I will make some introductory remarks to try and cover quite a bit of territory in that way. But I'm looking forward to responding to your questions that you may have or commentary that you may have on my presentation. So firstly, let me say that there is an umbilical cord that links our two continents. Colonialism and slavery characterize the history on both sides of the ocean. As a result of that history, we have racial discrimination that persists in our respective countries. I, like some of you, have been driven by my faith to become involved in the struggle against apartheid and standing up for justice in a non-violent way. When I was in prison, and my imprisonment, of course, was without trial during the 1980s, I said to my interrogators that I am compelled by my ethical code as a social worker and my Christian conviction and clerical status to fight against the injustice of apartheid. Active engagement in that struggle brought me alongside persons like Desmond Tutu, Alan Boesak, Beyers Naudé, and many others. Now, I was born into a family that belonged to the African Methodist Episcopal Church. My faith journey, therefore, already incorporated elements of resisting racial discrimination. It created, my belonging to the AME Church created an opportunity for me to study at Payne Theological Seminary in Wilberforce, Ohio between 1972 and 1975. That exposure during my 3 years in seminary exposed me to the post-civil rights USA, and of course it exposed me to liberation theology. And for me, in my early 20s at that stage, it consolidated my own personal convictions and prepared me for my involvement when I returned to South Africa. The Soweto resistance broke out in 1976 when school children took to the streets to protest against the imposition of Afrikaans as the language of instruction in the schools. That happened in June 1976. But that event, and as it continues, served as the impetus for accelerating the struggle, which culminated in the 1994 transition into a democratic South Africa, with Nelson Mandela as our first democratically elected president. Now, post-1994, post those first democratic elections, all of us, but particularly the church, believed that our comrades who went into government would behave ethically and use their positions of power and authority to respond positively to the aspirations of the citizens of the country. Well, I must say, we were very naive in believing that. At that stage, we were talking about critical solidarity that would link us with those who are in power. But very soon, we started realizing that our trust was misplaced. An early indicator of our misplaced trust came in 1996, when the economic policy shifted from prioritizing the poor to absorption into the liberal economics of the era and the enrichment of a few. The seeds for corruption were sown then already when South Africa entered into a multi-billion arms deal to acquire armaments which we do not need. And I will return to this question of corruption a little bit later. A very creative approach, just to pick up on the truth and reconciliation aspects of the theme that was already covered in the sermon during the service. A very creative approach was adopted to dealing with the perpetrators of apartheid. South Africa established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was chaired by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The purpose of this commission was to inform the country of the extent and consequences of this evil system of colonialism and apartheid. The commission invited victims of apartheid to share their experiences with the country. These sessions were broadcast on national television. Nobody could claim that they did not know the trauma and deliberate impoverishment that apartheid created. Instead of retribution, the perpetrators were given an opportunity to share their stories. If there was full disclosure on the part of the perpetrators, then they could get amnesty. And there were opportunities that were created for them to be reconciled with their victims, because they were the perpetrators of this evil system, and they were victims. If they disclosed completely, they could get amnesty, could even be reconciled with their victims. In the absence of full disclosure, you must understand that some came, but there was not full disclosure. There wasn't full disclosure. They could be prosecuted for the acts that they perpetrated. Now, this approach is contrary to what followed World War II. And some of you will recall the Nuremberg trials that were held following World War II. Now, during that process, while much of the truth was revealed, the reconciliation dimension suffered when the government did not implement all the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. For example, there wasn't adequate compensation, and there wasn't the prosecution of the perpetrators who did not give full disclosure, or some perpetrators who did not even come forward to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And so the truth was revealed, and it was inescapable because it was on national television daily. But the reconciliation suffered as a result of all the recommendations not being implemented. Now, in respect of reparations, the proposals for a wealth tax that came from many different quarters was also rejected by government. Beneficiaries of the system of apartheid and colonialism could make, if they implemented the wealth tax, could have made available to victims of the system resources that could be used as a form of reparation. Now, in a way, it's not a novel idea. You know, when Germany was reconciled, East and West Germany, they had a tax of that nature to help with the reconstruction of East Germany. And of course, there was the Marshall Plan to get Europe on its feet following World War II. The absence of such an initiative, coupled with the economic policy that was chosen in 1996 by the government, has resulted in massive unemployment, poverty, and increasing inequality in South Africa today. The biggest single contributor, in my view, to the betrayal of the post-apartheid dream of a wholesome, prosperous, non-racial South Africa has come through corruption. The arms deal mentioned earlier was a catalyst to facilitating the massive stealing of resources. At that stage already, people were beginning to steal as a part of the arms deal, all of the transactions to purchase arms and armaments that we did not need, because we are not at war with anybody. But the corruption started at that point already, and it has persisted since then. A decade of the Jacob Zuma presidency opened the state coffers to looters and the hollowing out of state institutions that should have guarded our resources. For example, we are suffering because of our electricity supply network being interrupted currently. The criminal justice system has been hollowed out. The police that must investigate in order to bring people into court to be prosecuted, that system has been hollowed out. The revenue service that has to collect taxes, that was hollowed out. The transport system is very inadequate, broken down from what existed before by virtue of the corruption. Municipal services of water, sewerage, and other services are suffering because of the corruption, people being allowed to steal money, not being prosecuted, not suffering consequences, and getting away with it. The tragedy of corruption is that the governing party, the African National Congress itself, is guilty of benefiting from corruption, in the sense that some of these people stealing what should have been used for the services to the citizens have given part of that money to the ANC for use for its own purposes. Now we had a judicial commission similar to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that exposed the extensive corruption, but those responsible are not being prosecuted to any significant extent yet. Now, everybody says the wheels of justice turn, and they turn slowly. We are becoming very, very impatient because those people who benefited from the stealing are benefiting from the money that they had stolen instead of being prosecuted and being put in jail. So let me conclude my remarks by saluting you for engaging in this session, which is an opportunity to reflect on the realities of our respective societies that require courageous people to stand up and speak prophetically to those in power. It's not every church that opens up this kind of opportunity for engagement with the critical issues that face our people. And I salute you for doing this. I personally, in this post-1994, post-apartheid era, in my current contribution, have devoted my resources over the last 3 years to rebuilding a collapsed Council of Churches here in Cape Town, so that we can create a platform where we can ecumenically, the churches together, begin to undertake various forms of ministry and also to bring out a prophetic voice to speak against the injustices that we experience in our society currently. So I want to say thank you for this initiative. Thank you for listening to my very brief remarks, and I look forward to responding to questions, comments that you may have, and from your inquiring minds about what it is that we are experiencing in South Africa, given this liberated country now, but a country being crippled by corruption, and how we're going to be able to move forward. So I will welcome some questions or comments from different members. Thank you for the opportunity to at least introduce some thoughts for discussion in our dialogue. Thanks very much, Lynn and colleagues.
Thank you very much, Reverend Louw. Pastor is collecting questions that people will. I will ask people who are on Zoom to write down the questions in the chat. I will collect them and read them for Reverend Louw.
Okay, moderator, can I suggest that we take, say, 3 or 4 questions at a time, and then I can respond, and we can then do another round of questions or comments.
Excellent, excellent. People, Reverend Lynn is collecting some, and those on Zoom, chat them down.
She was talking about Mike.
Okay.
So you explained it now?
Yeah.
And let me turn on your light so you can read it. Do you need it?
Yeah, turn on the light. Yeah, thank you. You want to read them?
No, you can. Well,
Yeah.
I do want to say thank you, Lionel, very much. We're moving around and trying to get this going. So it's wonderful to see Allegra in the background and to hear you. So thank you. Cecil will share some of the questions from the chat that he gets. And I got some from the people in the audience at the sanctuary. Is there a message you feel, Lionel, would be helpful to deliver to our leaders here in the U.S.? And I suppose that means in response to where you all are.
Well, I think that we must do the kind of thing that we are doing this evening, our time, and the morning, your time, where we engage with
Because this Wi-Fi seems to be overloaded. Do you want to text or say it or oh, maybe he just did.
I don't know if other people are here.
Yeah, they couldn't hear it out there. Where is he? Did he get off? Did he fall off?
They're falling off.
It's a possibility.
Patience, friends.
Okay. We think he, and this was a worry, we think he fell off. His Wi-Fi died or some disconnection. So we're hoping he'll be back on. And we thought because it was so hard for them to shift with sound, it would be easier just to give him the questions from the laptop. And this is a problem we'll also probably have at the end of the month in Johannesburg, because electricity, you heard, the infrastructure is not real strong and it gives out. So I'm stalling right now. Do you want to hear the questions that were asked? Yes. Okay. One is, with the benefit of hindsight, what are the ways you could have prevented corruption? One is, who are your rays of hope to change the system? Besides the churches, who else is working for change? How do your schools teach history of South Africa? How effective was reconciliation process? Where in the world today could you see truth and reconciliation and reparations being used for positive results? And is there a message you feel would be helpful to deliver to our leaders here in the U.S.? All good questions. But you at least got to hear him. Yeah, he really wanted to hear from you all. He kept saying, I don't want to talk long. I want to hear from other people. Okay, I guess they'll show us when he's on again, right? Okay. Well, when I got to Cape Town, before I met him, I visited a street girls project that is supported by our global ministries partnership with the Disciples and the UCC. And they took me to different sites where they bring in girls that are in the streets. They either were in trouble with the law or they were trafficked, victims of abuse most often. Some were immigrants with no parents, no family around. And they brought them in off the street and supported them and helped them with schooling and housing and trying to get them ready to go out into the world as adults. And those projects were very powerful. So I'll start with that was my first day experience, if I remember right. And one of them took me to the most impoverished area, and the electricity thing was in my mind. They had zillions of electrical cables hooked up to a pole where people were just taking electricity because they had no access to it in their home, so they did it illegally. And the conditions were, we've seen similar conditions but more extreme because of the numbers of people involved there. Okay, then I met with Allegra and Lionel. We went to a botanical garden. They took me to this huge botanical garden, acres and acres, and it was gorgeous and developed, and we walked around quite a while. And then he took me to the exhibition for Desmond Tutu. And I have several pictures I took of different panels that it showed. Photos, they showed lots of photos, and it covered the history of the anti-apartheid movement with Desmond Tutu's involvement, then the Truth and Reconciliation, the handing over of the whole report of the committee, which was a bound, very thick book that was published. And there's a picture of him handing the book to Nelson Mandela. And then there's a few panels that said, unfortunately, a lot of the work that went into that never got finished. You heard him say not so much Mandela, at least I didn't think so. I thought it was more after Mandela, and he only served one term. But then what Lionel was saying, it was started in '96, and Mandela was still president. Mandela is considered next to Jesus. I mean, he is like MLK is here. He was very much a hero for everyone. So, but maybe things started to unravel, not because he was corrupt, I don't believe, but because of people coming in and into the government. Anyway, he took me through that whole exhibit. And at the very end, he didn't say much, and Andrea never really told me much about him, except that you have to meet him. And he pointed in one picture, there was Nelson Tutu and some other figures, one of which Alan Bozak, who I'd also met before, I recognized in the picture. And he pointed to a guy in the back, a young man. He said, "That's me." And he just whispered it. He was just... And I did not realize until I read The Rainbow People of God by Desmond Tutu that Lionel Louw was very much involved in the action. And Desmond Tutu put his name in the book in several places. They were arrested together in Cape Town. They were all gathered at a church, and the police came in to stop the gathering and block the church. And Lionel, Tutu, and others went out and said, "No, you can't do this," and stood in the way and got arrested. They were released hours later, But I think he would tell us that he has been arrested a few times for civil disobedience. When I was there, I didn't realize all this because I don't think I had finished the book until after I went on to Botswana. But so he showed me that. Then we had a dinner together with the man that was in charge of the first free election in Africa, South Africa. I've forgotten his name. We had dinner with him and then another friend too, and Allegra and Lionel. And they talked about the work and how hard that was. It was the first time, and these were adults, first time they were ever allowed to vote was that election in 1994. And the pressure on this man, who I wish I remembered his name, I can see his face. And they talked about just the whole adjustments because, no voting before, no record of voting for the vast majority of people. The whole effort it took to organize, you can imagine that there was no mail-in ballots, so it was all organizing ballot places and organizing and making them safe because people didn't always feel safe voting, and making sure that those that needed the access got the access. So that was really big, helping to live into a new democracy. And the commitment to that new democracy that Mandela stood for was multiracial, multicultural. And so I didn't get to spend enough time with him as I had wanted, but when I went to Johannesburg, I then visited some other places that I learned more about. The Constitution Hill, which was a prison and turned into a museum. It was where Mandela was held. It was where Gandhi was held. Winnie Mandela was held, many people, and tortured. And then we got to visit the Supreme Court office in Johannesburg. And it's not an office, it's where the Supreme Court is held. And it is there they had a copy of the new Constitution. It's there I saw a Constitution written and accepted in 1994 that gave rights to GLBTQ people, women's rights, children's rights. There were whole sections on that, and I was just so moved by that. So there were many good things that came out of the revolution, but it's sad to hear of all the corruption and the things that are not good happening there. Is he on? Right. Okay. Anyway, the Constitution was just life-changing, and they recognize it's either 11 or 13 different languages, national languages of the country. Lionel and his wife are Xhosa, if I remember right. Reverend Dumasani Malu is Zulu. They have those languages plus Afrikaans plus English, and I don't remember all the others, but they've really tried to set, and Nelson Mandela and Tutu and the other leaders were really set to make it a multicultural government. They had to fight with other members of the African National Congress who wanted it black run. But they were determined. And Nelson Mandela's autobiography is here in the library, actually. It's in my office at the moment, but you can check it out and read it. Desmond Tutu, we have books by him, and so do I. But I was so impressed with their convictions about making it accepting and accepting everyone. Living that out is harder than it looks. Yeah. Yeah, Anita. I guess I couldn't. I,
Was there a redistribution of anything? What happened?
I wish I knew. That's a great question. I think from what I heard him refer to, and I read his presentation too beforehand, he sent it to me. And what I know, there were multinational corporations involved. The whole military thing and spending all that money, you know that countries like the U.S. were probably pushing for that. And in fact, you know, the U.S. is part of the corruption there. In fact, it was our CIA that got Nelson Mandela arrested, or helped get him arrested, and Stephen Biko too, I think, who was murdered by police in South Africa. So the military thing, that was multinational corporations wanting to get big bucks, and so they pushed their way in. I don't know about any economic reparations. I imagine there was some happening. One of the big problems was, just like here with indigenous people, is the shoving out of indigenous people out of their lands. And I read about that a lot in all over the country. And from hundreds of years ago, early on, the settlers would come in from other countries and shove people, fight battles, slaughter people to get rid of them. Pardon me?
I said the Dutch, the British, and
Yeah. Right. And so there's a long history of that. And there was still a history of that kind of gentrification. Suddenly they wanted to take over townships and areas where people were living, and they forced them out. During apartheid, there was also forced of, they would allow men to come and live in these, you know, tenements or just ghettos, but they weren't allowed to bring their families, and the families were left out in the townships. Well, then suddenly the townships were wiped out, so they had to find a place. Soweto became packed. And there's wealthy people in Soweto, because I went to a home that was beautiful. I just was outside. But there's a lot of crammed people in very small space. It reminds me of what is happening in Gaza in Palestine, where they're crammed into just uninhabitable spaces. Soweto isn't as bad as Gaza, but it certainly meant displacement of people. But I can't tell you more than that. Maybe we can get him somehow to do something just online. That might be an idea. If he can, he can't do evenings online, because that would be like 3 in the morning or something. I can't do, but maybe we can bring him back.
do you have Lionel's phone number?
No,
Dave has it at home, because I could
his
use
phone.
WhatsApp.
Oh,
I could use WhatsApp to call him and see. I mean, it's 10:20 there right now at night, but he might not be in bed yet. Maybe he's still trying to figure out how to get on. Who knows what's going on? Yeah. Thanks for hanging in there, folks.
That was wonderful to hear him.
Yeah.
We don't get more than that. That's
It's funny because I've met some South Africans not fairly recently in real life, right? And I'm like, and they're young. They're young, kind of like they're in their 20s and 30s. And never got to actually talk to them about it. storage. I don't know if there's any in my car. I think I put them all in storage. Bummer. Let me see what Cecil's seeing. No dice. She's gonna try calling him, but I think what I'll try to arrange is some other time when we can just be online with him. But it can't be like 7 o'clock our time, because that would be 2 in the morning or 4 in the morning. Yeah. Bummer. At least we got to hear him. So here is I just called Lionel and I talked to him on WhatsApp. If you don't know WhatsApp and you have a smartphone, you need to get to know WhatsApp so you can talk and text with people from around the world. Just using your cell connection. So they were not supposed to lose electricity today. The loss of electricity is often announced by the electric authority, and today was supposed to be, it's tonight there, it's like 10:20, was supposed to be a day when they had electricity, but it got cut off. So that's the issue, is that there's no electricity. He said that if I text him the questions, then he will respond to those questions by email. So we will at least have his answers. So, or Okay, why don't you email him? Because I'm doing climate change stuff this afternoon. Excuse me?
Maybe we could hear it service next Sunday. I don't know if there's a space.
We can make a space.
Because I think we'd all love to see the answers. So I don't know, on email or in the service or something like that.
Yeah, let me think about it and see. The other thing we could conceivably do is plan a time where we could just do online with him. But it can't be an evening, that's the tricky part. But if we even, yeah, or something like that, so we could do more back and everybody online, although it depends on the infrastructure there, but he was able to be on. So I'll ask him about that. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, they're special people. Anyway, thank you all. Thank you for your patience. And yeah, well, at least we got to hear his presentation, so that was good. Thank you upstairs in heaven. Thank you, Janet and David and Carol.